When you first start building your own e-commerce private label business, importing products from overseas can seem complicated. In this episode of the Amazon Seller Podcast, we are going to go over the basics of importing private label products so that you can feel confident when it comes time to bring over your next shipment.
This is the Amazon Seller Podcast, hosted by multi-million-dollar Amazon sellers helping you launch your private label business to the next level. Find us on amazingfreedom.com or subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and YouTube.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Amazon Seller Podcast. If you are new to the podcast, go ahead and check out amazingfreedom.com where you can listen and download all of our shows. In this week's show, we're going to talk about the basics of importing private label products and really set a foundation of how you can import from overseas, specifically from China. Now, before we get into that, I just want to ask, are you looking for a way to get started building a private label business or on how to improve your current private label products? I want to mention that we are actually coming out with a course called the Smart Private Label course. The Smart Private Label course is going to be an awesome resource to help you get started with building your own private label brands. And the best part of this course, it's free, okay? Yes, free and very valuable as a 7-part course series. So go ahead and go to amazingfreedom.com and don't miss out on registering for the Smart Private Label course. This is a free Smart Private Label course that's really going to help you get started. So if you're like most people, once you realize the awesome potential of building your own private label e-commerce brand, you start to look for product ideas and manufacturers and all that. And the thought that comes to most of our minds is, why would we look for product overseas or in China? Wouldn't it be easier to find a supplier locally in the US, right? I mean, it just sounds more complicated to import products from China, doesn't it? So, Liran, why don't you explain to us why you import your products from overseas and what your experience has been trying to find a local US manufacturer to start us off? And then we'll get into the basics and the how-tos of importing and just what it looks like to bring a product from China to the US and what that process is.
Sure. I actually, I started off importing from China, but then, I thought about why don't I look into some options in the U.S. and, it's become a very difficult process to actually find manufacturers, find factories that are willing to make your products. But I actually had somebody that I outsourced some of the work to look up manufacturers, and they started making phone calls. And what they found was they found somebody who was possibly willing to make one of my products. The issue was that they wanted a minimum order of 5,000 units. Now, just to put in perspective, so this is a product that I probably pay around $10 a unit for in China. And so that would be, obviously a $50,000 order. And in China, my minimum order for that product is actually 50 units. Now, I do pay like maybe if I produce 50 instead of like 100, I pay, an extra quarter or so. But, when I want to test and make smaller quantities, then I'll, of a new launch, maybe I'll get 200 or 300 units, and I don't need to take on a tremendous amount of risk. With, making the product in the US obviously becomes a much bigger investment, and even finding a manufacturer is just very difficult. So, I just go with the path of least resistance in terms of, finding suppliers, having options, getting better pricing that you can do with sites like Alibaba or global sources, where in the US, we don't really have that option. And so I would love to make products in the US if I could. I think you can probably sell them for more money, and would love to support, US workers, but it's a lot easier to import from China and find products. And I can go on Alibaba and at, 8, 9 p.m. Eastern, I could probably talk to 5 suppliers at the same time on Skype every single night. And you just can't do that in the US.
All right, that makes sense. So one of the big benefits that you're seeing is really it's just actually easier for you to contact Chinese manufacturers. And then, lower minimum order quantity, or MOQ, you might hear people talk about. It sounds like, US-based manufacturers a lot of times will require a higher MOQ, which obviously means a larger initial capital investment, right? Which most of us are trying to really put down is limited amount that we can up front for most of our products, right? Because cash flow reasons, or we're just a little bit nervous about how, if we're not confident that the product's going to be a winner yet, we want to do a smaller order if possible. So that's one of the benefits. It sounds like, dealing with Chinese manufacturers, typically you can get those lower MOQs.
Yeah, and I think for certain categories, I think people do like made in the U.S., and I don't mind paying more to make something in the U.S. because I know I can charge a higher price. There are certain categories I think that it's a little bit easier, I think, to find U.S. factories or U.S. manufacturers to make your products where customers pay more attention to it, like health and beauty, personal care, where if you're putting something on your body, then, you might care more where it's made. But in my categories, it really doesn't make sense for me so much to try too much to make it in the U.S. because of the MOQs and the fact that I think at the end of the day, Amazon customers are looking for a good price, good quality product.
Makes sense. Now, Andy, you've been importing products for a couple of years now, right? You've primarily imported your products from China. Correct me if I'm wrong, but just kind of tell us what your thought process was the first time that you were looking for a product to import from overseas. I mean, were you scared? Were you nervous? What kind of just explain to the audience what your thought process was and how it felt the first time you were looking to import a product from overseas.
Sure. So I was probably similar to a lot of Amazon sellers who first start out selling on Amazon. All of my inventory I was acquiring from stores in the U.S. like Walmart, Target, a few wholesale accounts. And so when I first started looking into private labeling and importing, there's definitely some hurdles there and some challenges that were a little scary. First thing you think about is how am I going to get it, into Amazon? Am I going to ship it by boat or am I going to ship it by air? The next thing, I was thinking right away was, how am I going to communicate with them? I don't speak Chinese. I import products from India. I don't speak Indian. And so, those were some of the things initially that you start to think about. And then as you get into it, you realize all the sales reps in China, most of them speak English. Like Liran just said, and most of the time you can chat with them on Skype, just like you're chatting with, friends that you went to college with. And so, as I started doing it, I realized that they've been doing this now for, 40, 50 years of, making product, manufacturing product, and then importing it in the U.S. That's how Walmart is the biggest, biggest box store in the country. Majority of the products they sell, right, they import from China. And so they actually have the processes really refined. They have the manpower to be able to meet the customer service needs. Whereas a lot of U.S. manufacturers, unfortunately, hopefully maybe that'll change, right? With Trump, he's trying to bring it back. But unfortunately, a lot of U.S. manufacturers, maybe they don't have the manpower to handle, the sales the sales reps that are needed to communicate with buyers like me, because that seems to be the biggest challenge. There are a few sites that you can source specifically U.S. manufacturers on, but it just seems like they're a little slower to get back, and it's just a little more clunky than when you start talking with Chinese suppliers.
All right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit too, Andy. So your first product that you ever thought about importing from overseas, like you said, you had been, obtaining inventory to sell on Amazon just locally through retail stores and online. But your first product, where did you even go to connect with a supplier for that product?
Sure. So there's a site in China. It's called Alibaba. We have Amazon here. They have really two main sites there, I think. One is Alibaba and the other one is AliExpress. AliExpress is probably similar to our eBay, where a lot of times you can buy one item or two items. And then Alibaba is what's called a business to business. It's where they want to specifically sell to business buyers like you or I, where the MOQ, the minimum order quantity, is going to be higher. And so I went to Alibaba, and that's where I connected with my first manufacturer.
Okay, great. So we go to Alibaba, we connect with the manufacturer. We talk over terms with them. We explain to them what we're looking for, and we ask them to put our own branded logo on it, right? Because we're looking to build a brand and private label a brand so that it's unique to us. Liran, I'm a first-time importer. I've talked to a supplier, and I've agreed with them on prices and what I'm going to pay them and everything. But now help me out. I'm confused. How am I actually going to get those products from the manufacturer to my doorstep or to Amazon? Can you kind of just go over like a couple ways that you can import products and what that would look like?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing you want to do is when you're looking at Alibaba, you want to work with gold suppliers, and you want to work with suppliers that have trade assurance. So that trade assurance one is like an escrow system within Alibaba that each supplier has, and they have different limits. One might have a $20,000 limit, one might have a $100,000 limit, where that money is secured so that the supplier doesn't always actually get the money until your product arrives or gets shipped out. So you have some level of security. As far as getting an order, your supplier typically, if it's a lighter weight item, they can arrange the shipping through air shipping directly through DHL, FedEx, UPS. Sometimes you can get things shipped from China faster than something that would go like from LA to New York in the US. So DHL Express, it's probably the most expensive way to ship, but you can actually get, in 5 days, you can get an item from China. So the supplier can typically arrange that. And if it's a heavier item, then you'll want to use boat shipping. And typically you work with a company called the freight forwarder in the US, and they arrange, you'll connect them with the supplier, and they will arrange shipping from the port in China to a port here in the US. And then from there, you can get it trucked over either, to you or to a third party warehouse to send it into Amazon, or some people will send to Amazon directly from the port.
Awesome. So when should I be looking at, contacting that freight forwarder? I think it's kind of a new word to most of us who are used to just getting small orders of items, right? If you're someone who acquires inventory just through retail or online sources, and you're usually just getting 10, 20 items locally, you're not having to deal with like logistics, right? Even most wholesale orders, the wholesalers that are US based usually can figure all that out for you, so you're not having to deal with it. So if I'm new to a freight forwarder, when am I actually contacting a freight forwarder? And I mean, what else do you need to really get in touch with them and get things going?
Sure. So once you place an order with a supplier, or typically if you're going to place an order with a supplier, like you've got your sample, you're going to place an order, it's a good time to get in touch with a freight forwarder, because it's probably going to take anywhere between 10 to 40 days for your product to be manufactured. So during that time, it's good to get in touch with a freight forwarder and then, connect them to your supplier, and then they'll be able to get the weights and the volume of your order and set that up. You might need to get what's called a customs bond. So during this process, during this time, it's a good idea to get this all set up. And freight forwarders, can do this in their sleep, right? They do this many times a day. So a good freight forwarder will be able to walk you through exactly what you need. It's typically good if you have a business set up, like an LLC or an S corp or something set up when you're importing, and then to get set up with a bond. And you could do that. It sounds complicated, but once you do it once, it becomes very like second nature. So a freight forwarder can help you set all that up.
Okay, and if I'm importing something by boat, how do I determine like where it's actually going to get shipped to in the US? Like there's different ports, right? It could be on the East Coast, the West Coast. Is that something I have to figure out? Is that something the supplier does? Is that something that the freight forwarder helps me figure out?
Yes. Well, the freight forwarder can help you figure that out for sure. Now, if you live in Texas, let's say, and you want an item to come to your home, then probably like Houston, it's a major port. You'll probably get that item shipped by boat to Houston. If you live in, I live in New York. If I want something to come to my house, I'm going to have it shipped to the port in New York. So it's going to be the closest port to you, and from there it would get trucked to you. If you're going to use a third-party fulfillment center, then you would want it to go closest to that third party. As far as time-wise and cost, it's best to get something shipped to California from China. That's the quickest. It's probably about 16, 17 days at sea. And if you have then your freight forwarder or a third-party prep company that can ship it into Amazon for you, you're going to save money, as opposed to if you're getting something shipped by boat and you're in Colorado and you're going to need to get a truck from a port. There's no port near you. You can need to get a truck from a major port. You're gonna have an additional expense. So it's good to think about ultimately what is your final destination and what the cost is going to be for trucking it from a port to you, or using a third-party fulfillment service or a freight forwarder to prep for Amazon for you.
Okay. And yeah, like you mentioned, if this is my first time, this all sounds a little bit complicated, right? But when it's all said and done, once you're in talks with your freight forwarder, they really can even communicate with your supplier for you, right? And they really can simplify that whole process and make it and handle a lot of it for you.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the freight forwarders are, they're experts at this, and they also work with a lot of Amazon sellers. So they should be able to, what I do is I just connect my freight forwarder with my supplier and let them kind of work out the details. And that's something that actually, Andy first taught me when I started having questions about, freight forwarders. He told me I just email my freight forwarder, email the supplier in the same email, I connect them, and it's like pretty easy once you do that.
Okay, so I think a mistake that some new private label sellers, people are interested in importing products. I think one of the mistakes that they make, if they're going to import by boat, is that they just simply don't contact their freight forwarder, right? They wait too long and they just they never contact one, and then they're stuck trying to either get one last minute or trying to deal with some of the stuff by yourself, which, I mean, realistically, you just can't do some of it yourself, right? Like some of the paperwork.
Yes. Yeah, you should definitely, contact a freight forwarder. And one of the things that you want to know about is making sure you have the right warnings or things that you need to have on products, and look into that. Either talk with your freight forwarder, who usually has a customs broker, if there are any special things. I know, Andy, maybe you can share a story. You were telling me about a woman who ended up getting stuck with a lot of product at the port because they didn't have the right warnings, right?
Yeah, so it's super important. I always tell people, if you really want to make this a business, again, whether it's a side income, which it can be, two things you need to do. You need to get a freight forwarder. You need to get a customs agent. A lot of times they're the same company. And so like the one I use, they're both. It's my customs agent and freight forwarder. And what the customs agent does for me whenever I import product, she makes sure all the proper paperwork is going to be completed for that product. And so, she's going to ask me questions. If it's like a medical product, which I don't recommend new importers or private label sellers to bring in, because if you try bringing in a medical product, sometimes they have different USDA requirements. But if it's anything that's maybe out of the ordinary, my customs agent will handle it. And I really have confidence in them. It's funny because when I first started importing, I thought that was the scariest part, right, of the process. And it's probably what held me back the most. But what ends up happening is that's actually the easiest part if you get professionals, right, to represent you. And they're really pennies on the dollar. It doesn't cost very much. It doesn't add that much margin, per piece to your goods. And so, the secure thing, the safe thing is get a customs agent, get a freight forwarder, and they will handle everything for you. Just like Liran said, they'll actually, once you make the order, you contact your freight forwarder, you give them the manufacturer email, and you don't even hear from them again until the product shows up at the warehouse, shows up at Amazon, or if you're bringing it, to your house, shows up at your doorstep.
And like Liran mentioned, a lot of freight forwarders will have a customs broker on staff. So a lot of times you can connect with both of those important pieces in one place. So Andy, again, you've been doing this for years, like I mentioned before. You've at this point imported hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of goods, right, from China, from overseas. Have you had any major issues during the importing process that you could kind of help warn us about, or has your experience been pretty smooth as far as the importing process?
Yeah, so far, knock on wood, I haven't had any issues. But again, I think it all comes back down to that right from the beginning, I secured a good customs agent and I secured a good freight forwarder. So I've not had any issues. Another thing that held me back, I think, from the beginning was worrying about sending money overseas. And so there are definitely some things you want to do to protect yourself. Alibaba actually offers some different ways that you can pay through their system, which affords you a little bit of protection. And I imagine maybe Liran will talk about this a little bit. It's called trade assurance. That, if you're a new private labeler, new importer purchasing from Alibaba, we definitely recommend that you use that because it does give you a little bit more protection.
Yeah, so Liran, you mentioned that already, right? The trade assurance earlier, and that it can set up an escrow a little bit. So that's helpful. You mentioned also the gold star suppliers. That's where the Alibaba suppliers are basically paying to be a gold supplier, and if they have multiple years of gold supplier status, then it kind of adds a layer of confidence to us that it's not just a business that's popped up overnight and appeared on Alibaba, right? It's an actual company that is doing some kind of business and is willing to pay some money to basically tell all the potential customers that they're serious about this. So those are a couple ways, and yeah. So Andy mentioned the fear. Some of the fears that most of us have when we're starting out is the importing. How are we going to get goods from China to us? And like we just mentioned, we kind of went through that, I think, pretty good there. And another big piece is how do we send money, overseas? And at this point, you both, again, have sent hundreds of thousands of dollars overseas. Liran, have you had any issues with payment as far as that goes?
I've never had an issue, and I've used trade assurance. So with trade assurance, you're basically sending money sort of through the Alibaba platform. So you can send money by credit card. If I have small orders, I'll do that because the credit card fee is typically smaller than my bank wire fee, and I get the points too, right? So I use orders of like $3,000-$4,000. I'll generally use a credit card, and then larger orders you wire money. But when you wire money, you're wiring it through Alibaba. So Alibaba will actually give you the wire information, and you're like wiring it into an escrow account. If suppliers that on Alibaba that have been there for years and are very trusted with Alibaba will actually get that money right up front. Suppliers who have not been on Alibaba as long actually have to wait to get that money until they ship the order. So you do have assurance that you're actually going to get an order shipped to you. And then I've had relationships with suppliers now where I've gone out to China and I've met them, and now I'll do some of my orders outside of Alibaba. I'll just send them the wire for my bank account because they can get the money up front. They don't have to wait through the escrow process, and I have a trust-based relationship with them. But I wouldn't advise that starting out with a new supplier. It's something that I've only done with a couple of suppliers that I've actually met face to face, and I fully trust them.
Yeah, so that's a good point you bring up, Andy. If you are new to this, would you only be looking at suppliers that do offer that trade assurance, or would you be comfortable if they're only telling me that they accept through some kind of wire payment? What would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, if you're new to this, just getting started out, it just makes sense to use the Alibaba trade assurance. When I first started 2.5 years ago, they didn't have that at the time, and so I was actually just sending wire payments. And again, I've sent over $500,000 to suppliers in India and China, and so far, not saying that it can't, but so far I haven't had one single issue. But like Liran said, as you work with the manufacturers, and build up a level of trust, eventually you probably will just start sending payments by wire.
And if you're getting samples, typically samples are done outside of trade assurance. So if you're getting samples and a supplier says to you, send us $100 by PayPal, that's totally normal. And I send that through PayPal. I'm not really worried about $50 or $100. I don't think they're looking to scam me for that amount, and I'm not really worried about getting scammed for $50 or $100. But typically, sample fees are sort of just outside of that trade assurance program.
Okay, so again, let's pretend I'm a newer seller here. I'm really trying to determine if I'm going to be importing a product by air or by boat. And Liran touched on this earlier, but you mentioned if it's light or if it's heavy, that's kind of deciding factor. But everything that I've heard talk about, sounds like air shipments just, so much easier. Can you guys just go over a little bit, like, what would really what would be kind of a deciding factor for you, or when would you really consider to go for a boat shipment, and what might be some of the benefits of, importing a product by boat over a product that could be just imported by air?
Yeah. So if an item is, let's say, 2 or 3 pounds, that's probably a good target for either one, air or boat. Meaning it's probably, you can still get a maybe reasonable price on air shipping. What I would, the factors to consider, one, are what's the difference in pricing between air and boat? Like, if I'm paying, $2 a unit to ship it by air, and I'm paying 50 cents a unit to ship it by boat, how much do I care about that? Meaning, if I just want to get it in quickly, let's say this is Q4 and I want to get my item in quickly for Q4 sales or for some kind of seasonal event that's coming up, then I want to get that in quickly, I might do it by air. I might do my first shipment by air just to get some units in and launch a product. But if I need to reorder and I'm close to running out of stock, I may look at an air option as well. So I want to compare both air and boat shipping, and I want to look at, like, my time frame of, again, if I'm running out of stock and I want to get stock in quickly, I might do a small shipment by air and then the rest by boat. And it is easier in the sense of it's less intimidating. My first several shipments I did by air because the supplier set it up. It was easy. I didn't have to worry about, getting a freight forwarder or really doing much. And the supplier just set it up and it came to my house, and it was quick and easy. But you could definitely save money if you do boat shipments. And as your shipments get bigger, if you're doing 100 units of something, 200 units, those are probably good for air shipments. But as you're doing, 500, 1,000 units, or if you have oversized items, items that are getting into the 5-6 pounds plus, then it makes a lot more sense to just start out with boat shipments. But for those pound to 3 pound items, I would compare the cost and also how quickly you want to get the item in, because it's going to take significantly longer by boat than by air.
All right, so yeah, that gives us a good look at, maybe some reasons that you might import by air or import by boat, kind of some determining factors there. Now, Andy, if I am new and I just want to try to make things as simple as possible, and it's a smaller or lighter item like Liran just mentioned, and I do just want to import by air, can you just walk me through how I would set that up with the supplier? Can they handle it for me, and just some things that I might want to be aware of?
Yep. So 99% of the time, the suppliers that you're working with are going to have a DHL shipping account or a FedEx shipping account, so they can actually handle all the shipping for you. Here's, though, what you really need to listen to. If you are going to ship something by air, you need to really clarify with your supplier that you want it to be shipped express. So you want to be clear and say, please, you can ship it by air through your account, but it needs to be DHL Express or FedEx Express. The reason why is some Chinese suppliers will tell you that they're shipping the product by air. However, they'll use Chinese airlines. And what tends to happen is, first of all, it's going to be a longer process. It just takes longer. And then a lot of times what will happen is they'll ship that to maybe an airport that's close to you, and you'll have to actually go to the airport to pick it up. But not only that, when you get to the airport, you have to fill out paperwork. If you don't have a customs agent, it doesn't work. And so, bottom line again is, what I always say is, get a customs agent first. But if you are going to have the manufacturer airship it, make sure you clarify with them that it needs to be DHL Express or FedEx Express, and make sure you say Express.
Okay, yeah, that's a good piece of advice there. It's something that's easy to mix up on, especially if it's your first time importing at all. So, all right. So I think that gives us a good look. I mean, bottom line is, right, if we're serious about building private label brands, getting products straight from the manufacturer, because we realize that this is just an awesome opportunity to build our own e-commerce business. Bottom line is, we're going to be importing products typically because of some of the reasons that Liran gave us early on. And you might be able to get away with importing by air for a little while, but ideally what you want to do is you want to set up with a freight forwarder and a customs broker so that you can import by sea if you need to. And most of the time, once you get things rolling, it's going to be cheaper and you're going to be able to compete better other sellers on Amazon or increase your margin, right? If you import by boat instead of by air. So I think that gives us a good look at the importing process, some of the basics, some of the things to be aware of when you first are getting started. And bottom line, guys, you just want to really, listen to what Andy and Liran just told us. Don't let it slow you down. Don't be afraid. I'm sure both of these guys would tell us the most important thing to do is to move forward with it and not be afraid and really just get out there and get products imported so that you can start selling them on Amazon. All right, so that's going to do it for this week of the Amazon Seller Podcast. Don't forget to visit amazingfreedom.com and register for the free Smart Private Label course as well. That incredible resource is exactly what you need to answer many of the questions that you probably have about private label. And do you have a specific question that you want to ask us and potentially have answered on a future podcast? Visit amazingfreedom.com/ask to post a question or a comment that we can look at. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time on the Amazon Seller Podcast.
You've been listening to the Amazon Seller Podcast. Make sure to subscribe and join us next time for another look at how to dominate the Amazon marketplace.